Welcome back. I'm Ryan from Bluewood Gaming, and we are finally here at the long overdue review of Final Fantasy 15. Now, I have some actually good reasons why it's taken so long, and that is because I have, well, for one, I've platinumed the game, which is the first game on PlayStation that I've platinumed, and one of only 10 or so games that I've actually gotten all the achievements for, all the achievements or trophies, whatever, throughout the entire time that those things have been something. The other games are all on the Xbox 360, by the way. But the other thing is, on top of that, I only have 2 missions left in the game to do. One of them is to upgrade a weapon, and then the other one is to complete a special dungeon. But besides that, I have 100% completed the game. So, yeah, that's why this is taken so long to get out. And, yeah, let's just get right into this. And because I know that I would just be jumping all over the place, I'm going to be trying a new layout for my reviews, actually giving them some sort of layout. And so, yeah, let's just jump right into this, starting with the graphics. There's not really much to say here. They look pretty amazing. You can see them. The video should be in 1080. I've been trying to do the all my Final Fantasy videos in 1080p. Looks really, really good. I know some people complain that it only runs at 30 frames per second, but I see why they did that, because there's some spots in the game that have very high particle effect counts, and if they tried to put 60 frame drops in that, where with them staying at 30, the game is a consistent 30 all the way throughout. There's only one spot where it actually dipped frames, but that could have actually been a problem with my own system, so it's not really the game's fault for that. So yeah, pretty constant 30 throughout. It looks really, really amazing. It's almost looks as good as Kingsglaive, the movie that went along with that, but I'll talk about that here in a minute. Moving on, let's talk about sound. Another place where it's actually pretty good. The music in the game I've used in a couple of my videos, and I like pretty much all of it. Doesn't really get too annoying. It can get a little annoying sometimes hearing the same track over and over and over again, but it's a pretty good mix of several different genres of music all coming together in this one game. One thing that I find a little lacking, though, is the music selection in the car. It's pretty much stuck to just Final Fantasy music, just music from the different games, and I would have liked them to expand it a little bit more past that. But yeah, pretty much nothing bad to say here about the sound. All the weapon sounds are just as you would think. They're pretty good. Although there's other things going on in a fight where you don't exactly pay attention to the weapon sounds all the time. All of the other things in the sound department are very good, but let's move on and focus on the voices. Now, I played through the game entirely with the English voice actors. You can switch it between the English and the Japanese voice actors whenever you want, just in the settings menu. I chose the English voice actors just because that's my personal preference. Both of them are pretty amazing. There's just some vocabulary that they use in the writing that could be a little bit better, but yeah, all the voice actors did a very, very good job, especially some of the villains in the game did a very good job at just portraying these different emotions just in their voice, even when you don't actually see the characters on screen to actually give you like some sort of like cue to go off of or anything else. It's just some of the best voice acting that I've heard all year. That's pretty much the simplest way to put it. Moving on, let's talk about the story. And for those of you wondering, no, I'm not going to have any spoilers in this section or throughout the entirety of this video until the very end, so you don't have to worry about that. But this game has some good parts and some bad parts to the story. Starting out with the bad parts, the game only gives you about 75% of the story. It requires you to have seen the Kingsglaive movie, Final Fantasy 15 Kingsglaive, and it requires you to watch the online like mini series about Noct and his friends and the backstory of how they all met and what their relationships are together before the start of the game, because the game gives you none of that. There is very little backstory in the game. It just kind of throws you in, and there you're this character, you have these friends, and it doesn't really explain anything about that, where the movie explains kind of what happened right after the tutorial of the game and kind of the motivations for Noctis and his friends going and doing everything in the game. And then there's the little mini series that you can find on YouTube that explains all the friendships, and those are not explained throughout any part of the game. So if you just play the game without watching any of those, you wouldn't know why Ignis likes cooking, or why Prompto takes so many photos, or why Gladius likes or is like the big bodyguard basically of Noctis. And those really should have been in the game. The deluxe edition of Final Fantasy did come with a copy of Kingsglaive, but they should have had the little mini-series and Kingsglaive ready for you to watch on the basic game itself, because those are things that you are required to watch to get the full story of this. And without those, some people just won't understand the story going through, because pretty much not much is explained, and you have to have already known some of the reasons behind things that characters are doing that they don't really show off in the game. And also, the story itself contained in the game, if you don't actually pay attention while you're playing it, and you're just passively listening to the story, you might actually get lost a little bit towards the end, as there's some important information that just kind of gets thrown in there. I would say it's actually set up and you expect it, but you have to pay attention, and it's not like just shoved in your face, some of these things that happen. So yeah, that's all the bad stuff about the story. Now actually going to the good stuff. If you do happen to watch the other things like the miniseries and the movie, this is actually one of the most engaging stories that I've played all year. You really want to find out what happens with Noctis and his friends and how they're going to turn around after all the terrible stuff that happens, and if they're actually going to succeed in their mission that they don't even really know is a mission that they're supposed to go on. They just kind of get thrown into these circumstances, and it's really great to watch them proceed through how someone would hope that they would proceed through. There's really not much that I can say about the story without spoiling a whole bunch of it, so I'll leave some of that towards the end. I found the story really engaging, but if you don't pay attention, then you might not have the same engaging story that I had. And just a little interjection before we move on to the next section of the review. This story, the ending of it was so good that I didn't play my, I didn't turn on a console or play a video game for a day and a half after finishing it. That is how good the ending of this story is. Although some people, it's fallen flat for some people because, once again, they didn't pay attention, but it is an amazing ending. So, yeah, let's just move on to the next section, being gameplay. Now, this is actually one of the most divisive parts of this game, if not the most divisive part of this game, because this is the first time that the Final Fantasy series has gone to a real-time action, kind of almost spectacle fighter sometimes. There's still major RPG elements that go into the fighting, but this is the first time that's not turn-based, and actually this is the reason why I picked up Final Fantasy, because I actually really hate turn-based combat when it's not on a mobile device or a mobile system. Like the turn-based combat of, say, Pokemon, that's completely fine for me. If it's on a portable game system of some sort, I'm fine with it. But on the big consoles, I actually really hate turn-based combat. So this is the first Final Fantasy game that I've ever played because of the change away from that. But I know that a lot of people that have played Final Fantasy for a long time actually don't like the combat here because it's not turn-based. Now, there is a wait mode in the game, which is kind of makes it turn-based. Not really, not in the slightest, but I don't really have much to say about wait mode. It just I never used wait mode in the game during my entire time playing through it, so I don't really have much to say on it, but that's kind of the closest that you're going to get to the traditional Final Fantasy gameplay, and I actually kind of like this fighting system. It's kind of like a spectacle fighter, like I said, because sometimes the camera will pan out and you'll do these big attacks, but sometimes they'll get really close and it'll be like tight one-on-one fighting. It's not like the most interactive thing because you do just hold down the attack button and Noct does the attacking for you, but yeah, that's not exactly the most interactive. It can get boring after a while. The Adamantoise fight, which took over an hour to do, actually took kind of 2 hours to do. That was not a fun fight. After a long time, the actual combat does get a little repetitive, but that is broken up by link strikes, which are like almost special QTEs without actually a button press that you can do with your teammates. And then there's also special attacks that you can order your teammates to do, and then there's also the Armiger mode, which lets you summon a whole bunch of your weapons, and you get to go into this mode where you can't die, and you do something like 5 to 10 attacks a second, and you can really do a whole lot of damage with that. But besides those special things, it is just holding down the attack button and then occasionally pressing or holding down the dodge button, and then parrying every once in a while. After you dodge, occasionally if you dodge at the right time, you can parry back and do a critical hit. So yeah, the combat can get a little repetitive, but that is kind of the most divisive part of the gameplay. Another really divisive part is the driving, or the lack thereof driving. I personally played most of the game with Ignis driving, just because I have a lot of things that I can do while he's going from one place to another, as my setup has my computer right next to my console, so I can do things on the computer. But if you are just playing Final Fantasy, putting all of your attention into that, having a 7-minute drive might get a little boring when you have to do it several times. Now, once you've visited somewhere, you can actually just teleport or kind of skip to that spot by going through a loading screen instead of actually driving to the place. But when you're first driving to somewhere new, there can be some pretty long drives. About the longest drive that I've seen was 8 or so minutes. That was going from one end of the map all the way to the other. Was 8 or so minutes. Might have been a little bit longer, but I know it wasn't less than 8 minutes. So, yeah, there's some pretty long drives. It's normally not like long drives like that. It is normally just a whole bunch of 2 to 3 minute drives, which it would be less boring if while you were driving you could actually do some things, but in this version of the game, you can, when you're the one driving, when Noctis is the one in the driver's seat, so you should have control over the car. If you tell it to go, like, a 90-degree turn left, it won't do it. You are stuck on the road, you cannot go off the road, and if you take your hand off of the steering, or you don't put in a input on the stick, you will, Noctis will correct the car back into the correct lane. Now, that's really, really restrictive driving, and you can kind of control how fast the car goes, but you can't really control, like, you can't go off the road. You have to turn in a very specific way, and you can only turn at specific turns. It's really, really restrictive, and I wouldn't have that much of a problem with it because I never drove. But I heard from multiple people that in earlier versions of the game, the driving was more open. Like, you could drive off the road and you can kind of drive however you want, kind of almost like Grand Theft Auto, but they restricted that for some reason, and apparently they maybe bring back that kind of driving because there's some parts of the gameplay that they are changing in updates, and that might be one of them. We don't have a confirmation on that, so the driving might just stay kind of terrible like it is, but it might get fixed. Now, continuing on kind of in the gameplay, another thing that I've heard a lot of people complain about is the side quests in the game and how they don't really have much to do with the rest of the game as a whole. And I personally don't find that to be that big of a problem, but I've played a large amount of open world games where this is kind of the norm, and quite a few of the problems that I've seen people talk about with the gameplay is actually just standard things now in open world games, like all these side quests. And some people are saying that that Noctis should be feeling a certain way throughout the entirety of Chapter 3 because of a thing that happened in Chapter 2, and just all these different things where I don't really think that they should be, specifically for how he should be feeling in Chapter 3 because of what happened in Chapter 2. I was in Chapter 3 for about 10 hours. I would have hated the game if he was acting the way that people wanted him to because of what happened in Chapter 2. Which, to give you a hint at what it is, essentially the things that happened in the Kingsglaive movie happened between Chapter 2 and 3. So, because of what happened in the Kingsglaive movie, Noctis should be feeling a certain way, or at least they think that he should be for the entirety of, like, Chapter 3, maybe even part of Chapter 4, but I would have hated that because it would have gotten, like, really, really annoying. So, I'm glad that that didn't happen. Just thinking of other things, the game actually, one of the big things that I was worried about in the beginning was I heard that there was some points of no return, in this game, and I absolutely hate points of no return in open world games. And this one specifically, it went from being open world to a very linear experience, and I was actually worried about how that would come out and how that would play out. But thankfully, it works out fine, or at least I think it works out fine. Up until a specific chapter, I believe it's chapter 9, from chapter 1 to 8, you get the open world of Lucius, and the entire open world that you get for most of the game. After chapter 8 and chapter 9 onwards, chapter 9 you go to Alticia, which is a smaller open world, but still kind of an open world. It is just a small subsection of a city, but when you go to chapter 9, you can talk to a specific character to go back to the open world, kind of like through time travel. But, so that works out fine. But once you go into chapter 10 and forward up until chapter 14, which for me took about, I think it was somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 hours, that is exclusively all, just completely story. There's no open world throughout the entirety of it. From chapter 10 to 14 is complete, just linear story bits. And I actually really liked it because I got to choose when I went and did that. It wasn't forced upon me to go into the linear bits. I was able to choose when I wanted to do that. And the game actually rewards you kind of for going through and actually playing through the rest of the game, because there's some certain things that you can only do after you complete the game, because the real ending of the game is in chapter 14, but there's a chapter 15 which is you going back in time after the game has finished and going back to the open world of Lucius and Alticia to complete some other things that you couldn't do when you were there originally. And speaking of the later chapters, there's something specifically, it's chapter 13. They have already confirmed that they are going to be doing major overhauls to chapter 13 because even though the entirety of the story is great, chapter 13, which is a very, very linear chapter, it is the worst part of the game, is chapter 13. For those of you that have played through the game and kind of don't know what chapter 13 is, I'm trying to think of a way to explain this without spoiling anything. It's the one with the hallways and the city after the train. So yeah, after the train part, but yeah, that part. After the train part, but before the time skip. That one. The hallways. The hallways and the robots. That's that part. That part goes on for about, I think it's an hour or two that part goes on for. And that part is just, as I just explained, it's just hallways. And it is so boring that I almost put down the controller while playing this game for like the first time, because that part was terrible. But thankfully they have already stated that they will be doing a free update to fix the entirety of chapter 13, because the people that made the game have stated that they don't like how it turned out. So thankfully we will be getting that fixed. So now let's kind of jump back on track. Let's finish this video off with two things. I'll start first with my final kind of score and final things about it. This game is definitely worth a buy if you can watch the mini-series on YouTube, and if you can watch Kingsglaive the movie. There's places to watch the movie online, but it's kind of illegal, kind of not, copyright laws and all that. So I'm not going to be saying where you can find it online, but you can find it online pretty easily. If you watch Kingsglaive and the series on YouTube, and you've seen some other things about Final Fantasy, and you kind of understand the world that Final Fantasy 15 has, and you like the combat at least somewhat, and you're okay with the driving sections, then this is definitely worth a buy. If you can't watch the miniseries and Kingsglaive, then I would say wait for a sale. Or if you don't like the combat and the driving sections, also wait for a sale. It doesn't have to be a deep sale, just wait for a sale. Or rent the game if you still have places that rent. But, yeah, I actually personally really like this game. And as you will see in my top 10 games list for the year, tomorrow, that it should be uploaded, this actually got really high in the top 10 games of the year. So I actually really, really like this game. So, yeah, that is it for this. Now we're going to move on to the final section of the video where I talk about some spoilers. So if you don't want to have anything spoiled for you about Final Fantasy 15, I've kept all the footage so far spoiler-free. I've tried to stay spoiler-free as much as I could for the rest of this video. But now for the next, 3.5-ish minutes, I'm going to talk about some spoilers and some things that I did not like, or that I did like, about Final Fantasy 15. So let's get right into that. Okay, so let's just get the things that I didn't like in the spoiler section out of the way first. First off, there's not really any setup for why Noctis likes fishing so much. In the little mini-series, even the mini-series that shows what Noctis did before the game still shows no idea why Noctis has such a love for fishing. Like, all the other characters, like Prompto and his photographs, Ignis and his cooking, all of that stuff all gets set up, but Noctis liking fishing, as much as he does, he almost obsesses over fishing. It comes out of left field, and it's pretty terrible. And it doesn't really fit for the character. Now, if he just knew how to fish, and you fished for the survival reasons and the reasons that you do in-game just to get fish to eat, I would be perfectly okay with it. But with him being so obsessed with fishing, it just doesn't fit his character for how he's been described and how he's been shown up until the game. The next thing, they underuse Bahamut. Like, really, he's in the game for all of 3 minutes. When Noctis goes inside the crystal, Bahamut's there to give him exposition of why he has to use the Ring of the Lucii to completely destroy demons from the world. And then he shows up for the kind of final boss fight with Ifrit. He shows up to kind of help Noctis fight Ifrit for just a cutscene. All he does is a cutscene, which will be playing in the background right now, and that's it. He's in the game for less than 3 minutes. Like, I would have loved Bahamut to be a summon that you could have summoned in the open world of Lucius. I would have loved that, but no, Bahamut's in this game for 3 minutes, completely underutilized. And story-wise, it works, but I would have just loved to see more of Bahamut because I really love the character design behind his whole armor, and I want to know if he's actually like a giant person inside the armor, or if he has more to do with his dragon origins, like how he's been in the other Final Fantasy games. I just want to know more about Bahamut in the Final Fantasy 15 universe, and that doesn't happen in the 3 minutes that we see him in game. So now this next thing is kind of good and kind of bad, depending on how you see it. I didn't think I would be going on a feels trip, F-E-E-L-S, feels trip, in this game. Like, seriously, this is one of the saddest games that I've played through all year. like after the fight with the Leviathan where Ignis loses his sight. That shit was sad. When Luna dies, that shit was also sad. When you go for 10 years and find out that shit just hit the fan, kinda also sad. When you find out that Arden was at once part of the Lucius Calum family, and then was betrayed by his family because he tried to help people and rid the world of demons, moderately sad. At the end, when everybody dies, even though you saved the day, also really sad. And for the people that didn't catch it, yes, Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto and Noct all died at the end because they were all shown for a few seconds in the little afterlife Aether realm, wherever, where they killed Arden for good. When Arden was becoming his like demon form or whatever in the Aether or whatever they call it, the afterlife or whatever, where Noct uses the ring to finally kill him. You see Ignis, Prompto, and Gladius all there with them, showing that they all died too. So that shit was sad. And then after that, there's the part where in the afterlife where Luna and Noct gets to finally be married, and he gets to kind of be king, but it's in the afterlife, so it doesn't really matter. That part's also kind of sad, and then it transitions right into the title screen, and you see how the whole thing kind of connects together, and all that packed together into like an hour, not even an hour, like 30 minutes of cutscenes all at the end of the game as one giant feels trip all at the end was enough to make me stop playing games for a day and a half, like I said earlier. If you want to see all that stuff, because maybe you haven't finished the game, you're just here watching the review in the spoiler section, the ending video that I have on my channel that says like the ending and after credit scenes, watch that after the Arden fight, and that whole point, that whole thing after that is extremely, extremely sad, and it is the most feels that I felt for a game all year, and it is amazing. Okay, so now after all of that spoiler talk, there's one last thing that I want to talk about for the people that have held on for this long, and that is Final Fantasy VII, the remake. Because I know that that is a very big game. It is like the best-selling, kind of the best Final Fantasy game from what I've heard, and it's getting a full-on remake. And originally I wasn't going to pay attention to it because it was just another Final Fantasy VII re-release, but it is apparently a ground-up remake using the combat system of Final Fantasy 15. So because it's not turn-based combat, I'm actually looking into it. I don't know if I'll get it because it's also coming out in episodic form, which I don't really get because it was originally released as a full game. So why not just release the whole game as a full game? I'm thinking it's because it takes a long time to remake everything from almost scratch, I would guess, because I don't think that they could... the way that I envision them doing it is starting from the code that they had for the PC version of Final Fantasy, and then putting it into a new engine and redoing a whole bunch of stuff. And I figure that that's going to take a long time, so I think the reason why they're doing it in episodic form is so that they can release it as they finish it. But I have no idea, and that's apparently not supposed to come out until the middle or the end of next year. But if it does have the combat system of Final Fantasy 15, where it's not turn-based, then I will look into it and maybe even get it. So yeah, that's it for this video. This video has been way long overdue. Like I said earlier, tomorrow, which should be Christmas Day if everything goes according to plan, Tomorrow will be my top 10 games of the year list. So look out for that tomorrow. It should come out really early tomorrow. So that is it for this. Remember, I'm Ryan from Bluewood Gaming, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.